Hello, I'm Kathleen Meryck, counsellor, life coach, EFT practitioner, Reiki master, and co-author of the research paper into EFT for chemo-brain. And in the introductory video, I shared with you that I was also a cancer survivor who'd had to deal with the challenge of 3 cancers all at once and during COVID. This is my story, what happened, and what I did. When I told Dr. Philip de Brun in August 2014 I thought EFT could help his patients with chemo-brain, I had some experience of cancer. I'd helped care for my father when he was dying of lung cancer, and I was diagnosed with bladder cancer in December 1998, and that tumour was surgically removed 2 days later. 3 months on, it had returned. So I had another surgery plus 1 dose of chemotherapy. Then 3 months after that, it was back again and yet another surgery, and 6 doses of chemo followed. It was a very frightening and testing time. With my father, I had no energy medicine practices or psychological tools at my disposal. With my own cancer, I was in my infancy of both my Reiki mastership and counseling practice, and I used them as best I could to help myself. Through the Reiki analogies, I read my body to uncover the root cause of my dis-ease that had manifested as a physical disease, and I worked to clear them. Regular checks for 17 years, 3 and 6 monthly, then annually, confirmed I was clear. And in 2016, it was decided no further checks were necessary and I was discharged. Then life threw me a worrying curveball. In mid-November 2019, I saw signs that made me suspect I had bladder cancer again. I acted immediately, pressed medical buttons, and on 16th December, underwent surgery to remove 3 tumours. How serious the grades of each tumour were unknown until we got the histology results. While waiting to go for surgery, I thought about how it had been before, what I could recall, who I was now, and the tools and skills I had to help myself that I didn't have before. And my mantra, firmly believed, was, I've got this. I survived it before and will do so again. Obviously, I was shocked and upset, but I was positive I could come through this and assured the few people I shared this information with. To ensure they removed all of the 3 tumours, they, how shall I put this, did a thorough radical clean out of my bladder. And suffice to say, the effects were extreme and very debilitating. I was on fire in that area and didn't sleep for 3 weeks as I was in the loo every 20 to 30 minutes, day and night, and in a great deal of pain. To say it was a tough time would be an understatement, but I was otherwise well and strong, and I knew I had to ride it out using my extra tools, EFT and Reiki, for support and healing. On the 28th of December, just 12 days after the surgery, I took a call from a doctor at the hospital asking me to go in to check something. Obviously, I asked, to check what? Oh, just something we want to check on your urogram scan. I agreed. But when the appointment details came in, it told me to go to a different department, the chest and lung clinic, not urology. This seemed strange, even to my addled, sleep-deprived brain. And whilst I felt some apprehension, I had no cough, no breathing problems, so decided not to speculate and catastrophize, but to stay calm and wait until I saw the doctor. I also didn't tell anyone about this, because if it was nothing, I didn't want to worry and upset them further. The CT scan on the 10th of January showed something at the base of my right lung. This could be one of three things: an infection, inflammation, or a tumor. Lung cancer. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. And to hold myself together, I chose to focus on the fact I had no symptoms and it could be an infection or inflammation. So I stood a 66% chance of it not being cancer. And I was going to focus on that, think that, until someone told me differently. Extensive tests were needed: PET CT scans, knee bus procedure, MRI, lung biopsy, all of which had to be fitted in around the requirements for the urologist dealing with the bladder cancer, because the bladder histology results showed all three tumors were the highest grade aggressive cancers. Not good news. Second surgery was scheduled for the 14th of February, just 2 months after the first, to check that no lesions had returned and to take a biopsy to find out if the cancer had breached the bladder wall, an even more serious scenario. Already in a turmoil of uncertainty, at 3 a.m. on January the 30th, I found a lump in my right breast. What? Sleep deprived, in pain, disbelieving, spiraling into panic, I turned the air blue. And then I remembered I'd had a mammogram that was clear 3 or 4 months before. So I thought, probably fatty tissue or a cyst, or maybe sleep deprivation really has addled my brain. And I calmed down. Nevertheless, at 9 a.m., I raised the alarm with my lung doctor, who saw me and could also feel the lump, and made an immediate referral to the breast cancer clinic. I knew I was seriously in the deep doodah, with just 2 potential other serious problems. The second bladder surgery was just 2 weeks away. The first tests for the lung were before that. And attending numerous medical appointments and keeping track of everything was a challenge, as I was still recovering from the physical effects of the bladder surgery. From feeling well and having no discernible symptoms, in the space of 7 to 8 weeks, I was facing the prospect of having 3 possible cancers. How did I feel and cope with that? There was a sense of profound disbelief at the possibility I faced, and an avalanche of emotions that went with it: anxiety, worry, sadness, fear of the unknown, fear not of death itself, more the manner in which I might die. I was also aware that the enormity of what I had to deal with was a recipe to lose my mind if I didn't know my mind and took responsibility for my attitude, my mindset. One thing I knew for sure: I wasn't ready to shake off this mortal coil, and I fully intended to stick around and torment everyone for a long time to come. So in order to cope with this, because I live alone, have no partner, no children or close family, with only 3 or 4 trusted friends to help me, I needed a strategy to work out what I thought and felt about cancer, asking, how am I going to play this so that it sits right with me, irrespective of the outcome? I'll tell you about that in my second recording. But in the meantime, the second bladder surgery was performed on the 14th of February with histology in a couple of weeks. The extensive Many tests for the lung went ahead, and the breast clinic began their investigations and multiple tests and procedures. The pressure ramped up further in February 2020 when I realized I was going to get all the definitive results within the space of 7 days. It was a dark and frightening time and a struggle not to let fear overwhelm me. In early March, the definitive news on each concern was as follows. Bladder was good news. Whilst highest grade and aggressive, the cancer had not breached the bladder wall, therefore not spread. There were 2 options going forward, either to remove my bladder with all its attendant problems afterwards, or 2 to 3 years of chemotherapy. I told my surgeon that as much as I loved him, he couldn't have my bladder. The cancer hadn't spread, and I'd take the chemo. On the days the pain from the chemo are pushing me to the edge, I remind myself that I chose this treatment in order to keep my bladder, and the pain burning was temporary. Losing my bladder was a permanent outcome. The lung, no such luck that it was inflammation or infection. It was cancer, and the tumor was 50 millimeters. There was no treatment other than urgent major surgery to remove the bottom half of my right lung, a right lobectomy. Because of its position, radiotherapy and or chemo were not an option. The medic's view was that without the surgery, I'd be dead within 12 months. Plus, any tumor that was 40 millimeters and above was automatic chemotherapy post-surgery, irrespective of whether the lymph nodes were clear. This was a huge shock because I had no cough, no shortness of breath, no chest-lung problems as an indicator that something might be wrong. In time, I saw that as a result of my bladder cancer, the urogram scan had shown the bottom of my lungs and the silent killer within. So there was a gift attached to my bladder cancer, even in the midst of all this horror. And the breast. Part of me held on to the hope that as I already had 2 cancers, that was my lot, and this would be benign. Again, it was bad news. I had a grade 2 ductal estrogen and progesterone positive tumor, 24 millimeters in size. This cancer was a bigger body blow, in part because I'd done my due diligence and had a mammogram 3 to 4 months before that was clear. And that blow had come when I was battered and bruised, literally, from effects of procedures and surgeries, infections, no sleep, unbearable pain, a collapsed lung during the lung biopsy. I'm going to digress for a moment because there's something really important I must make you aware of that was news to me. It was found that mammograms do not show tumors in me, even when ultrasound and MRI do, and the tumor is 24 millimeters in size. So even if you've had a screening that was clear, if you find something that bothers you, raise the alarm and insist on an ultrasound scan. Back to my story. The doctors had discussed which cancer, what treatment had to take priority, and it was decided to put me on a drug to try and stop the breast tumor growing while the other cancers were dealt with, before surgery and radiotherapy for the breast and possibly chemo, depending on the lymph node status. To be given this terrible news within days was overwhelming, and I was reeling. Not unnaturally, I thought one or more of the cancers had spread. But no, all these cancers were separate. They were all primary cancers. There was no metastases. The doctors said they were in shock. They had not encountered anything like this before. I think it was at this point that I went into a state of profound shock that I remained in for the next 6 or 7 months. Now we knew where we stood. The lung had to take priority. A few days later, I saw the lung surgeon. Surgery would take place within days, and I'd get a call the next day to confirm the date. The call came, but I was told, "I'm so sorry, but your surgery has been cancelled indefinitely, as we have closed all our theatres and are turning them into COVID wards." This was another huge blow. I'd weighed up the pros and cons and the risks of this major surgery, accepted the urgent, couldn't delay, geared myself up, and now it was off. And as we had no idea when it would happen, I faced the very real possibility I might die before that surgery took place. A very dark day. I felt and was helpless in this situation. But when I calmed down after using EFTi and Reiki, I realized there was something I could do to help myself. The chemo for my bladder had been temporarily deferred for the lung surgery, which was now delayed indefinitely. So I rang my urology specialist nurse, explained the situation, and said, if the COVID situation allowed, could we get on with the chemo? He said yes, and arrangements were made. 2 sessions into the first cycle of 6 treatments, things started to go my way. The lung surgeon rang to say the NHS had allowed him to buy a few beds in a private hospital. And as I was at the top of the urgent list, I was allocated one of those beds. I had just 2 days to get everything in place before an ambulance collected me, took me for tests, before I was put into isolation for 48 hours before the surgery. To say I was wound up and stressed would be a huge understatement. This was major surgery with the risk of heart attack and stroke. And as it was the lung, with the effects of the anesthetic, possible death. And I was told if I had the surgery and then caught COVID, I would probably die. This was at the start. There was no vaccine and no one really knew what we were dealing with. On the other hand, if I had the surgery, if I didn't have the surgery, they said I would die. So what did I want to do? I dealt with the facts. I said, we knew I had lung cancer. I may not get COVID, so go ahead. So while COVID raged without any vaccine, I underwent the surgery, which, thanks to the skill of my surgeon, was successful. Not wanting to put patients at risk of hospital infection, I had my surgery on the Monday morning and went home on the Thursday afternoon. That was only 4 days instead of a minimum of 12. And I had none of the support systems, including physio, usually provided for this major surgery. It was the Easter weekend, And with the exception of those 4 days of a friend staying with me on discharge that the hospital agreed to, as I could provide a separate bathroom, bedroom, etc., I had to go through the 3 to 4 month recovery period caring for myself on my own. And due to the urgency, 3 weeks after the lung surgery, I resumed chemo for the bladder, undergoing another 4 weekly treatments to complete that first cycle. All of this was a seriously tough ask when you're having a tough time. A dear friend said she'd seen a quote and thought of me. Tough times don't last. Tough people do. I stuck it on the fridge as a reminder on the bad days. I don't think there's anyone in the country who wasn't affected by COVID one way or another. As a cancer patient, I found its effects to be greater physically, emotionally, and mentally than friends reported experiencing. But I consider myself lucky that I was in the system by the time COVID changed our lives. Otherwise, it's unlikely I would be alive today. On top of everything around COVID everyone else was dealing with, lockdowns, isolation, restrictions, people in my position had to deal with everything else on top, being clinically extremely vulnerable, the risks and strictures of that, alongside the need to be attending hospital appointments and having surgeries. No physio services operating, so walking up, down your stairs and up, down around your garden was your physio for recovery from lung surgery. No cancer support groups within the hospital to attend, with the comfort from being with people who are experiencing similar things. Staff shortages due to sickness and or being assigned to COVID wards and other departments. All this added to the distress and overwhelm, and I had to dig very deep to remain mentally and emotionally resilient. And in addition to the physical effects and emotional aspects that I could tap on, there's a lot to deal with mentally. And by that, I don't just mean my thoughts, but the mental overload of juggling up to 4 appointments a week, plus mountains of new information to understand the different cancers, that they have different grades or no grades. The terminology differs, tests and procedures differ, and treatment options were different depending on each cancer and its location and size. All this was demanding and exhausting. Navigating my way through the wealth of information and applying it to myself specifically was like organizing a huge military or disaster campaign, and it became a full-time job. The nuances of one aspect could have a direct impact on another. And to feel safe and to trust, I needed all parties to be fully informed and up to speed at all times. And as I was the only constant, I felt I had to be the link that did that, to ensure nothing was missed, no mistakes were made. It was the one way I cared for myself and took some control in a scenario where it's so easy to feel like you have no control, that you're completely helpless. The daily mental acrobatics required to stay on top of everything and understand what was being said at times felt utterly overwhelming. And even now, I don't know how it didn't fry my brain. All this went on for 2.5 years and is still going on to a lesser extent. I not only needed to relay the facts accurately, but also think through the impact on myself what I felt my body could handle, asking how what one discipline was saying impacted on what another one was proposing. Plus, the bits of information I was told were vital, but not apparently known by another discipline. For example, no vaccinations whatsoever for 6 to 8 weeks after finished a chemo cycle. That soy and soya would stop the breast drug working, so check all food labels and avoid it. That meant I had to shop for myself. The word exhausting doesn't come anywhere near to covering the effects. I found using the tool of EFT helped clear some of the emotionally draining aspects, which helped restore clarity and some much needed physical energy. The bladder and lung cancers had been surgically removed, but I still had breast cancer. However, that surgery had to be delayed until a suitable period of 4 or 5 months of no treatment whatsoever for the other cancers, including chemo for the bladder, could be found. And there were other surgery effects, infections, and health issues going on during this time that delayed it even further. In April 21, another urogram showed I now had a problem with my left kidney. Not cancer, thank goodness, but surgery was needed, which was done within 4 weeks. That surgery failed, and I had to have a second surgery 8 weeks later, which thankfully was successful. And I still had breast cancer. It was 2 years down the road before we found that 4 to 5 month window of no treatment. And at last, I had my first breast surgery in December 21, followed by second surgery in February 22. Histology showed no spread to the lymph nodes, and all cancer had been removed. Excellent. I underwent a course of radiotherapy in April 2022. But there was more. Post second surgery, but before radiotherapy, in March 22, with chest pain, breathing difficulties, a killer headache, and nausea, but unable to even speak with the GP, let alone get an appointment, 111 sent an ambulance to assess me. It was thought I may have COVID, but no one wanted to risk me being in a hospital. So I stayed at home caring for myself and trying to get fit enough for the radiotherapy. And then the icing on the cake, in April 22, halfway through the radiotherapy, another urogram showed the kidney problem was back, and a third surgery was done in June 22, all of which meant further delays regarding the chemo for the bladder. And I did not begin the second year of treatment until August 22. As you can imagine, 2.5 years of unremitting onslaught from 3 cancers, kidney problems, multiple surgeries and invasive procedures, plus chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and infections, is a great deal for anyone and their body to go through. So what's the situation now in February 2023? I'm delighted to say at this point, as far as we know, I'm cancer-free. I'm under surveillance for all 3 cancers and still undergoing chemo for the bladder, but I'm cancer-free. Unbelievable. All the medics who know my case say it is amazing I'm still here and doing so well. Some have said I am a miracle. I don't know about that, but I do believe in miracles. How could I not? Many have kindly expressed admiration for my attitude and mindset in dealing with the many effects of these 3 cancers all at the same time. I only mention this because I do believe we have some control, even when faced with the worst we can imagine. We just have to take control of what we can. For example, our thoughts. We can contribute to our miracles by choosing what we think and how we're going to be, by choosing the best thought, the strong, resilient thought that supports us. This isn't deluding ourselves, but choosing to focus on any positive we can find. And in that process, release the good chemicals our body needs to heal, rather than catastrophizing, thinking the worst, and putting our bodies in an even greater state of stress and distress. Cancer isn't just one cause, it has multiple contributors. So my approach was to tackle it from multiple angles: allopathic, energy medicine, and complementary therapy. From my first suspicions in November 2019, I did Reiki on myself every day and still do. I used EFT for emotions, thoughts, and the effects of surgery, drugs, pain, etc., and other psychological techniques to support me physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. A wonderful friend who's a health kinesiologist kindly gifted me 2 monthly hair analysis tests, which identified any heavy metals and toxins, invasive organisms, dietary needs, and food intolerances that were placing an added burden on my body. And she gifted me the tailor-made supplements needed to support me and help my body heal. From what I've said, please don't think there were any heroics here. I was just slogging it out as best I could. There were many days of sheer hell, black holes filled with pain, fear, despair, exhaustion, wondering how much more my body could take, whether I could keep going, of wanting physical contact that was non-medical, someone to touch me, hold me, give me a hug, some comfort, someone I could lean into for a short while and breathe out, because they would answer the phone, make a cup of tea, or cook a meal. But that wasn't an option. So I worked on accepting that and let that want go so as not to make things harder for myself. On the other hand, I was blessed that I had 2 ways to use my healing hands to help myself: EFT and Reiki. And there were moments of glorious disbelief and pure joy. I'll share those with you in part 2. The positive mindset I chose helped me increase my mental strength and resilience. At times, endurance was the order of the day, but I took any evidence that I'd endured before and told myself I could do it again. When I felt I couldn't endure the effects of the chemo, I turned it around by reminding myself I chose this, that this was being done for me, not to me. It was temporary and would pass. That smallest shift in my thinking somehow changed something in my body, and what I was experiencing became more tolerable. Due to my circumstances, I had no one around me to bear witness to the daily aspects of this cancer roller coaster. Someone who was an outside observer who could give me encouragement, another perspective, something I needed when the going was really tough. And I realized that if I needed that, it was down to me to provide it, which led to the practice of self-validation. That is, to look at everything you have been through and are still going through, at how well you are doing, and fulsomely acknowledge that. If that's hard to do, if you can't get that distance, imagine you are witnessing the person you love the most going through all this. See how they're handling it and ask yourself, what would you feel towards them? What would you say to them? Then apply those same words, that same love and compassion to yourself. I was starring in a horror movie that seemingly had no end. And another thing that kept me going was gratitude, finding a reason to be grateful in whatever form it took. It not only gave me another perspective and helped me shift my focus back to the positive, but released feel good chemicals into my body when they were sorely needed. In part 2, I'll share with you my reflections about the whole cancer process and the approach I took, all of which is purely personal. I'm not saying this is how anyone else should do it, but I'm sharing this in case there's just one thing that will resonate with one person, to give them hope, to help them help themselves, to help someone through their work, or provide support to a friend or loved one. In addition to conventional cancer treatments, there are supportive therapies out there that work. We know the NHS has limited resources, but EFT can give patients a cost-effective, simple, but highly effective tool to help them navigate their cancer and its effects, as our chemo-brain research shows. EFT is also highly beneficial for stressed out, burnt out medics. Cancer patients need all the help they can get. So I do hope you will attend the EFT International Symposium and find out about the research that supports EFT's use in cancer care. Thank you.